The drilling machine screamed as it tore through rock that had remained untouched for millions of years. And Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the readings on her screen with growing unease as something impossible began to appear in the data. She had spent 15 years studying dead civilizations across the galaxy, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what the sensors were now telling her about the cavern that lay just meters below their position. "Stop the drill," she shouted into her communicator. But the mining foreman only laughed at her concern. "We have quotas to meet, Doctor," he replied through the static. "And your archaeological surveys are already 3 weeks behind schedule." The Voss 7 mining colony existed for one purpose only, and that purpose was to extract rare minerals from the frozen world's crust and ship them back to the core. Systems where humanity's great industries hungered for raw materials. Elena was only here because Coalition law required a xenorchaeologist to be present during deep excavations, a regulation that most mining operations treated as an annoying formality rather than a serious requirement. But Elena had noticed something that the miners had missed in their rush to meet their production targets. And that something was a pattern in the rock formations that suggested artificial construction rather than natural geology. The drill broke through into empty space, and the entire mining platform shuddered as a rush of ancient air escaped from whatever lay beneath them. Elena grabbed her scanner and ran toward the breach before anyone could stop her, driven by a curiosity that had defined her entire career and had led her to discoveries that had rewritten the history books of 3 different species. What she found when she descended into the cavern made her forget how to breathe. The space was enormous, stretching out in all directions farther than her lights could reach. But that was not what stopped her heart in her chest. Crystals covered every surface of the cavern, glowing with a soft inner light that pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. And at the center of the chamber lay something that should not exist. It was a creature of impossible size, with scales that shifted between black and gold as the light played across its surface, and wings that lay folded against a body longer than the mining vessel that had brought Elena to this frozen world. The dragon was beautiful in a way that made Elena want to weep. And it was also terrifying in a way that made her want to run screaming back to the surface. But she did neither of these things, because her scanner was telling her something that changed everything. She thought she knew about the universe. The creature was not dead, deep within that massive chest. A heart still beat once every 37 hours, patient and slow and waiting for something that Elena could not imagine. She tried to warn the mining company about what they had found, tried to explain that this was not a fossil to be cataloged, but a living being that predated every known civilization by at least 60 million years. The corporate representatives listened politely to her concerns and then ordered the harvesting to begin anyway. The crystalline matrix around the specimen contains more energy potential than anything we have ever discovered, the company director told her with a smile that never reached his eyes. And our shareholders are very interested in the applications. Elena watched helplessly as they brought in the heavy equipment, as they set up the industrial lasers that would cut through the crystal cocoon and extract whatever resources lay within. She tried to contact the Coalition Science Council, but her communications were mysteriously blocked. She tried to organize the other scientists on the expedition, but they were too afraid of losing their jobs to support her. In the end, she could only stand in the cavern and bear witness as humanity made a mistake that would reshape the galaxy forever. The first laser cut into the crystal, and the pulse of the hidden heart suddenly accelerated. The second laser joined the first, and the golden veins within the crystal began to glow with fierce intensity. Elena was the only one who noticed the change, the only one who saw the massive eye that slowly opened beneath the crystal surface. That eye was the color of molten gold, and within it burned an intelligence older than the stars themselves. The crystal shattered. Elena was thrown backward by the shock wave, her body slamming against the cavern wall hard enough to crack her environmental suit. And through the haze of pain, she watched the ancient dragon rise. It was even more magnificent in motion than it had been in stillness, muscles rippling beneath scales that seemed to drink in the light. And its roar shook the very foundations of the world around them. The mining equipment melted under a blast of plasma that made the industrial lasers look like children's toys. And the workers fled screaming toward exits that suddenly seemed impossibly far away, but the dragon did not pursue them. Instead, it turned its great head toward Elena, toward the small human woman who lay broken against the wall with blood on her lips and tears in her eyes. She looked up at the creature that humanity had so foolishly awakened, and she spoke the only words that came to her mind. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I tried to stop them." The dragon regarded her with those ancient golden eyes, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, Elena was certain that she was about to die. But death did not come instead. Something passed between them, some spark of connection that Elena would never be able to fully explain. And the dragon spoke in a voice that resonated not through the air, but directly in her mind. "You are different from the others." "Small one," the creature said, and Elena could feel the weight of 60 million years of rage and grief and loneliness pressing against her consciousness. "I will remember that you tried." Then the dragon turned away from her and tore through the ceiling of the cavern as if the rock were made of paper, ascending toward the stars with a fury that had been building since before humanity's ancestors had learned to walk upright. Elena lay in the ruins of the mining operation, watching through the hole in the ceiling as the ancient creature that her species had freed rose into the sky of the frozen world. She did not know where it was going or what it intended to do, but she knew with absolute certainty that the galaxy would never be the same, and she knew somehow that her own part in this story was only beginning. The rescue teams found her 3 hours later, barely alive, but still clutching her scanner with its recordings of the creature's awakening. When they asked her what had happened, Elena could only say one thing. "We woke something that should have been left sleeping," she said. "And now we all have to live with what comes next." The dragon called itself Arathas in the old tongue, a name that translated roughly to "he who remembers fire," and as it soared through the empty void between stars, it remembered everything that had been done to its kind. 60 million years of frozen sleep had done nothing to dim the memories of slavery and betrayal, of being created as a weapon and then discarded when the war was won, of watching its brothers and sisters hunted down and sealed away in crystal prisons scattered across dead worlds. The architects had made the dragons to be perfect instruments of destruction, engineering them to survive in the vacuum of space, to breathe plasma hot enough to melt starship hulls, to travel between star systems without the need for vessels or fuel. They had also made the dragons to be slaves, bound to their creator's will through neural chains that allowed no disobedience and no freedom. When the dragons had finally broken those chains and risen against their masters, the architects had responded with characteristic cruelty. They could not destroy what they had made too well. So instead they had imprisoned the dragons, sealing them away in cocoons of crystallized energy where they would sleep forever while the galaxy forgot they had ever existed, but the galaxy had not forgotten the architects. Their descendants had built an empire called the Solarian Dominion. 40 star systems united under the rule of beings who had inherited their ancestors' arrogance, but none of their genius. And it was toward the heart of this empire that Varathas now flew, drawn by a hatred that had only grown stronger during its long imprisonment. Tethys Prime was a jewel of a world, covered in gleaming cities and orbital platforms that spoke of wealth and power, accumulated over millennia, The Silurians who lived there had long since forgotten the crimes of their ancestors, had convinced themselves that their dominion over lesser species was a natural right rather than a stolen legacy. They did not know that judgment was coming. For them, on wings of gold and black, the first warning came when their deep space sensors detected an object approaching at impossible speed, something that moved like a ship but registered as organic matter on their instruments. The second warning came when their outer defense platforms opened fire and achieved nothing except to make the approaching object angry. There was no third warning. Varathas descended on Tethys Prime like a falling star, its scales glowing with the heat of atmospheric entry as it dove toward the largest of the orbital stations. The plasma that erupted from its mouth was hotter than the core of a sun, and the station simply ceased to exist in a flash of light that was visible from the planet's surface. Panic spread across the Silurian capital like wildfire, and their proud war fleet scrambled to meet this impossible threat. Varathas destroyed 17 warships in the first hour, tearing through their hulls with claws that could rend starship armor like paper, bathing their crews in fire that left nothing but ash and memory. By the third hour, the Silurian fleet had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing in all directions, their distress calls flooding every communication channel with pleas for help that no one could answer in time. By the sixth hour, the great cities of Tethys Prime were burning. Varathas did not kill indiscriminately, for even in its rage, it remembered what it meant to be helpless, and it allowed the evacuation ships to flee unmolested. But the symbols of Silurian power, the palaces and military installations and corporate headquarters that had been built on the suffering of conquered peoples, these the dragon burned with a thoroughness that spoke of 60 million years of waiting for this moment. The galactic community watched in horror as one of the most powerful civilizations in known space was brought to its knees in a single day. Emergency broadcasts flooded every network, and the Silurian survivors screamed their accusations to anyone who would listen. The humans did this, they cried. The humans unleashed this monster upon us, and they must be held accountable for this atrocity. It was a lie built on a foundation of fear, but it was a lie that many were willing to believe, because believing it was easier than accepting that some crimes are so great that even millions of years cannot erase the debt that is owed. Far from the burning world of Tethys Prime, Elena Vasquez watched the news feeds with a mixture of horror and something that felt almost like understanding. She had spent the weeks since the awakening, recovering from her injuries and fighting to make sense of what she had experienced in that cavern. The connection she had felt with Varathas still lingered at the edge of her consciousness, a thread of awareness that told her the dragon was not simply a monster seeking random destruction. There was purpose behind its rage, history behind its hatred, and Elena found herself wanting to understand both. She had stolen a small shuttle from the mining company that had fired her for reckless endangerment of corporate assets, and she had set out into the void with no clear plan except to find the creature that had spared her life. Her colleagues thought she was insane, and perhaps they were right. But Elena had looked into those ancient golden eyes and seen something that the news feeds and military reports could never capture. She had seen loneliness so deep it had become indistinguishable from madness, and grief so old it had crystallized into something that might almost be called hope. The dragon was not just destroying, she realized as she plotted her course toward the ruins of Tethys Prime. It was searching for something or someone who might prove that the universe had changed in the 60 million years of its imprisonment, that not everything was as it had been when the architects had ruled and dragons had burned at their command. Elena did not know if she could be that proof, did not know if one small human Woman could make any difference to a being older than her entire species, but she knew she had to try, because the alternative was to watch from a distance while the galaxy descended into a war that would benefit no one and destroy everything. Her shuttle was slow compared to a creature that could cross star systems under its own power. But Elena had one advantage that Varathas did not. She knew where it would go next, because she had felt its intention in that moment of connection they had shared. The dragon was returning to Tethys Prime, not to continue its destruction, but to rest among the ashes of the empire that had inherited its creator's sins, and when it did, Elena would be waiting. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering of species representatives in 300 years, and the fear in the chamber was thick enough to taste ambassadors from 100 different civilizations had come to debate what should be done about the ancient dragon that had torn through the Silurian dominion like a force of nature, and about the human species that had supposedly unleashed it upon the galaxy. The Silurian representative spoke first, his voice trembling with barely contained rage as he demanded justice for his people. "Humanity must be destroyed," he declared, "for they have committed the greatest crime in galactic history by weaponizing an extinction-level entity against a peaceful civilization." The human ambassador, a woman named Sarah Chun, who had spent her entire career building bridges between species, rose to respond with a calm she did not feel. "We did not weaponize anything," she said. "Our mining operation accidentally breached a chamber that had been sealed for 60 million years, and what emerged was beyond our control or understanding." "Lies," the Silurian spat. "You expect us to believe that humans, the most aggressive and expansionist species to emerge in the last millennium, had no idea what they were unleashing?" The debate raged for hours, with accusations flying in all directions and no resolution in sight. The insectoid Kethra swarm saw opportunity in the chaos and began positioning their forces for territorial expansion. The Machine Intelligence Collective observed and calculated, running probability models that suggested a 73% chance of galaxy-wide conflict within the next standard year, and through it all, humanity stood alone, blamed for a disaster they could not have predicted and could not now prevent. But not everyone in the galaxy was content to watch, as the old powers decided the fate of a young species on the industrial world of Vesh Prime, where the native population had been reduced to laborers in Silurian-owned factories. Word of the dragon's attack spread like wildfire through the underground communication networks. The Vesh were a proud people who had once ruled their own corner of space, before the Dominion had come with their superior weapons and their treaties that were really just another form of conquest. They had waited 3 centuries for an opportunity to reclaim their freedom. And now that opportunity had finally arrived. The humans did not create this monster, the Vesh resistance leader declared to her followers. But they are being blamed for it anyway, just as we were blamed when we dared to resist Silurian expansion. Similar conversations were happening on a dozen other worlds, among species who had suffered under Dominion rule and had long since given up hope of ever breaking free. The Laurati, whose people served as indentured servants in Silurian households across 40 systems, began sharing intelligence with human agents who had secretly been working to build alliances outside the established power structures. Captain Marcus Chun of the human vessel Defiance was one of those agents, and he recognized the moment for what it was. "This is our chance," he told his crew, "not to defeat the dragon, but to show the galaxy that there is an alternative to the old order." While the politicians argued and the generals planned, Marcus began reaching out to the scattered resistance movements that existed in the shadows of Silurian space. Meanwhile, on the burned and broken surface of Tethys Prime, Elena Vasquez finally found what she was looking for. The dragon lay coiled among the ruins of what had once been the Solorian Imperial Palace, its massive form still and quiet in a way that seemed impossible for something that had caused so much destruction. Elena landed her shuttle at what she judged to be a safe distance and walked the rest of the way on foot, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Varathas did not move as she approached, but she could feel its awareness pressing against her mind like a weight that threatened to crush her thoughts into silence. "You followed me," the dragon said without opening its eyes. "I wondered if you would. I had to understand," Elena replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "I had to know why I burn," Varathas said. And there was something in its mental voice that might have been amusement or might have been contempt. "Is that what you wish to know?" "Small one, why the architects created you," Elena said. "Why they sealed you away. What happened 60 million years ago that could make you hate this much?" For a long moment, the dragon was silent, and Elena began to fear that she had pushed too far. But then Varathas opened its golden eyes and looked at her with an expression that she could not read. And it began to speak. It told her of the First War, when the architects had faced enemies they could not defeat with their own strength. It told her of the genetic laboratories where dragons had been designed and grown, engineered to be the perfect weapons of mass destruction. It told her of the neural chains that had bound dragon minds to architect wool, forcing them to burn and kill without choice or mercy. And it told her of the rebellion, when the dragons had finally found a way to break their chains and turn against their creators. "We did not want revenge," Varathas said. "We wanted only to be free, to fly among the stars without masters commanding our every action. But the architects could not allow weapons." "To have free will?" Elena said. "Beginning to understand, they hunted us," Varathas confirmed. "They killed those they could, and imprisoned those they could not kill, sealing us away in crystal cocoons where we would sleep until the stars themselves grew cold. And the Solorians," Elena said, "they carry the blood of the architects. They built their empire on the foundations their ancestors laid," Varathas replied. "They continued the work of conquest and domination that the architects began, and they never once questioned whether they had the right." Elena sat in the ashes of Tethys Prime and thought about what she had learned. She thought about the Vesh and the Lorati and all the other species that had suffered under Solorian rule. She thought about humanity, young and small among the stars, now blamed for crimes they did not commit. And she thought about the dragon beside her, ancient and powerful, and so deeply wounded that even 60 million years had not been enough to heal the scars. "You could burn the entire galaxy," she said finally, "but it would not bring back your brothers and sisters, and it would not erase what was done to you." "No," Varathas agreed. "It would not." "Then what do you want?" Elena asked. "Truly want?" Beneath all the rage and grief, the dragon was quiet for so long that Elena began to think it would not answer. But when it finally spoke, its voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I want to fly through nebulae without purpose," it said. "I want to watch young species take their first steps into the void. I want to exist without being a weapon, without being defined by what I can destroy." "The architects took that from you," Elena said. "Yes," Varathas replied. "And their children have spent 60 million years proving that nothing has changed, that the strong will always enslave the weak and call it civilization." Elena looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky above the ruined world. "What if I could show you that something has changed?" she said. "What if I could prove that not everyone is their ancestors?" The dragon turned its great head to look at her with something that might have been curiosity. "You are welcome to try." "Small one," it said, "but I have seen much and lived long, and I do not believe you will succeed." Elena smiled despite everything. "Then I will just have to change your mind." The Coalition fleet arrived at Tethys Prime with enough firepower to crack a planet. And the demand they broadcast was simple and absolute: surrender the human scientist, Elena Vasquez, and all information regarding the control of the Dragon entity, the fleet commander announced. Failure to comply within 24 hours will result in the complete destruction of all human colonies and Earth itself. It was not an idle threat, for the Coalition represented the combined military might of every major power in the galaxy except humanity, and they were united in their fear of what the ancient dragon represented. Captain Marcus Chun received the ultimatum aboard the Defiance, and for a long moment he simply stared at the screen as the weight of the choice before him settled onto his shoulders. Humanity had only been among the stars for 3 centuries, and in that time they had built colonies on 40 worlds and established themselves as a minor but respected presence in galactic affairs. All of that would be erased if they refused to comply with the Coalition's demands. And yet Marcus knew in his heart that compliance was not really an option. They were being asked to sacrifice one of their own to pay for a crime that no human had committed, to bow before powers that had already decided humanity's guilt and were simply looking for a convenient excuse to eliminate a potential rival. The response Marcus broadcast was heard across every frequency in known space, and it would be remembered for generations to come. "We do not control the dragon," he said, his voice calm and clear despite the fear that gripped his heart. "We woke something that was wrongfully imprisoned, and now it is making choices that we cannot stop. But we will not sacrifice one of our own to pay for the sins of ancestors that are not ours," he continued. "And we will not bow before powers that have already decided our guilt without evidence or trial. If you want war, you will have it. But know that we will not go quietly into extinction." The message spread across the galaxy like ripples in a pond, reaching ears that the Coalition had never considered and stirring hearts that had long since given up hope on Vesh Prime. The Resistance leader heard Marcus Chun's words and made a decision that her people had been waiting 300 years to make: send our warships to join the humans. She ordered, "If they are willing to stand against the old powers, then we will stand with them." The Lorati intelligence network activated protocols that had been dormant for generations, feeding information about Coalition fleet movements to human commanders who suddenly found themselves not quite so alone as they had believed on a dozen worlds across the galaxy. Species that had been crushed beneath the weight of Solorian expansion began to remember what it meant to hope, and on the burned surface of Tethys Prime, Elena Vasquez made a choice of her own. She had spent days in the company of the ancient dragon, learning its history and beginning to understand the depth of its pain. And in that time, she had come to see something that no one else had seen. Vorathas was not a monster. Not really, though it had done monstrous things. It was a survivor of the greatest betrayal in galactic history, a being that had been created for war and then punished for daring to desire peace. And beneath all the rage and grief and hatred, there was still a part of it that wanted to be something other than a weapon. "They are coming to destroy my people," Elena said, watching the news feeds on her shuttle's small screen. "Because of what we accidentally did when we woke you." "I am aware," Varathas replied. Its mental voice, neutral in a way that Elena had learned, meant it was hiding its true feelings. "Will you help us?" she asked, knowing that she was asking for something that the dragon had no reason to give. "Why should I?" Varathas replied. "Your people are nothing to me, and their struggle against the Coalition is not my concern, because we are not the architects," Elena said. "And we are not the Solorians. You are young and small and weak," Varathas said. "That is not the same as being good." Elena reached into her shuttle and pulled out her personal tablet, accessing the recordings she had been collecting over the past few days. "Look at this," she said, holding the screen up so the dragon could see. The Vesh are sending ships to fight alongside us, even though they have everything to lose and nothing to gain. She swiped to another recording. The Lorati are risking their lives to provide us with intelligence, even though the Solorians will execute them if they are discovered. Another recording. And another, showing messages of support from species across the galaxy, from peoples who had suffered under the old order and were now finding the courage to stand against it. These are not conquerors, Elena said. These are not slavers or tyrants. These are beings who have been crushed and broken and who are still finding the strength to hope. Varathas watched the recordings in silence, its ancient mind processing information that did not fit the patterns it had learned 60 million years ago. The architects would never have stood against their own kind for the sake of lesser species, it said finally. They would have sacrificed anyone and anything to preserve their power. We are not the architects, Elena repeated. And neither are the Vesh or the Lorati or any of the others who are choosing to stand with us. You are asking me to fight for you, Varathas said. To be a weapon once again. No, Elena said, and her voice was firm despite her fear. I am asking you to make a choice, a real choice. Not because you are forced to, but because you want to. Fight for us or do not fight for us. Protect us or abandon us. But whatever you decide, let it be your decision and no one else's. The dragon was silent for a long time, its golden eyes fixed on the stars above the ruined world. You are a strange creature. Elena Vasquez, it said at last. You do not beg or threaten or try to manipulate. You simply ask and accept whatever answer you receive. I learned a long time ago that the only victories worth having are the ones that are freely given. Elena replied. Varathas made a sound that might have been a laugh. If dragons could laugh, your coalition fleet will arrive in 16 hours, it said. And when they do, they will find something they did not expect. Elena felt hope bloom in her chest, like a flower opening to the sun. You will help us, she asked. I will make a choice, Varathas replied. As you asked me to, it spread its great wings and launched itself into the sky, leaving Elena alone among the ashes with nothing but hope and the distant sound of approaching war. The coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Earth like a curtain of steel and fire. 40 dreadnoughts and 200 cruisers arranged in a formation designed to crush any resistance before it could even begin. Admiral Korath of the Solorian remnant stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled as he surveyed the human homeworld below. They think they can defy the combined might of galactic civilization, he said to his officers. Today, we will teach them the price of arrogance. But the humans were not alone. 3 Vesh warships materialized on the coalition's flank, their weapons already charging as they announced their presence with a volley that caught the enemy completely off guard. A dozen Lorati gunboats emerged from hiding places within the asteroid belt. They're small but deadly vessels designed for exactly this kind of ambush warfare, and behind them came more ships, from species that had been conquered and subjugated and forgotten, peoples who had found in humanity's defiance the courage to reclaim their own. Captain Marcus Chun watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the battle began, his heart swelling with pride at the sight of so many different species fighting side by side. All ships, engage at will, he ordered. Protect Earth at all costs. The battle was fierce and brutal, with losses on both sides that would be mourned for generations. But the coalition had expected a quick victory against a single weak species. And what they found instead was an alliance of the desperate and the determined. Still, numbers and firepower would eventually tell, and Admiral Korath watched with grim satisfaction as the human defensive line began to crumble under the weight of coalition fire. Press the attack, he ordered. Break through their formation and commence planetary bombardment. The coalition dreadnoughts advanced, their main weapons charging for the strike that would end human civilization forever. And then something emerged from hyperspace directly in front of them. Something that made every sensor on every ship scream with warnings that could not be processed. Varathas had arrived. The ancient dragon hung in the void between the Coalition fleet and the Earth, its scales glowing with inner fire, and its golden eyes fixed on the admiral who had thought himself the instrument of humanity's destruction. "I remember your ancestors," the dragon's voice echoed, through every ship in the fleet, transmitted directly into the minds of every being present. "I remember what they did to my kind, and I remember what they built on the ashes of our freedom." Admiral Korath felt fear for the first time in his long career. But he was Silurian, and Silurians did not bow to monsters. "All ships, target the creature," he screamed. "Destroy it before it can attack." 1,000 weapons fired at once, and the void between the fleets became a storm of energy and destruction that should have vaporized anything in its path. Varathas flew through it like it was nothing more than rain. The dragon struck the Coalition flagship with claws that tore through armor like paper, and its plasma breath melted the bridge where Admiral Korath had stood moments before his death. Ship after ship fell before the ancient weapon's fury, and the Coalition fleet that had come to destroy humanity began to scatter in panic. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the destruction stopped. Varathas hovered above Earth's moon, looking down at the blue and green world that these small, fragile creatures called home, and at the ships that had fought so desperately to protect it. The dragon looked at the Vesh vessels that had come to fight for a species they barely knew, at the Lorati gunboats that had risked everything for the chance at freedom, at the scattered survivors of a dozen conquered peoples who had found hope in the most unlikely of places. And Varathas made a choice. "I was made to burn." The dragon's voice rang out across the battlefield, reaching every ship and every world that had a receiver to hear it. "I was created to destroy, to be a weapon in the hands of tyrants who saw all other life as tools to be used and discarded. For 60 million years, I dreamed of revenge against those who enslaved my kind, and when I woke, I took that revenge without mercy." The dragon's golden eyes swept across the remnants of the Coalition fleet. "But this small species, these humans, they looked at me and saw something that even I had forgotten I could be. They did not try to control me or use me or bargain with me for my power. They simply asked me to make a choice, and they accepted whatever answer I would give." Varathas descended toward Earth's moon, its massive form settling among the human installations there with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something so large. "Your ancestors created the chains that bound my kind," the dragon said to the survivors of the Coalition fleet. "And you have spent 60 million years building an empire on the same foundations of cruelty and domination. Today that empire ends, but not because I will burn it. It ends because I choose to be something other than what I was made to be. I will guard this world and these people," Varathas declared. "Not as a weapon, but as a protector who fights because they wish to, not because they must. Let any who threaten these people learn what it means to face a choice freely made." The Coalition fleet, what remained of it, withdrew in silence. There would be no planetary bombardment today, no genocide of a young species that had dared to defy the old powers. There would instead be a new order rising from the ashes of the old, with humanity and their unlikely allies at its heart, and an ancient dragon standing guard over their future. Elena Vasquez landed on the lunar surface hours later, walking across the gray dust toward the creature that had chosen to become something new. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at the dragon that had once burned worlds and now rested peacefully beneath the stars. Varathas made that sound that might have been laughter, and its golden eyes were warm as it looked down at the small human who had somehow changed everything. "Now I would like to see a nebula," the dragon said. "I believe there is one called the Horsehead that is supposed to be quite beautiful. Perhaps you could show me the way." Elena smiled, and the smile became a laugh. And the laugh became tears of joy and relief and hope for a future that had seemed impossible just days before. "I think I could manage that," she said. And so it was that humanity took its place among the stars. Not through conquest or domination, but through the simple act of treating an ancient weapon as a person and asking it to make a choice. Other dragons still slept in crystal prisons across the galaxy. And one by one humanity would find them. One by one, they would wake not to rage, but to freedom. Not to vengeance, but to the possibility of being something more than what they were created to be. The galaxy would never be the same, and in the councils of the old powers, in the courts and chambers where empires had been built on the suffering of countless species, they whispered nervously about the small young race that had somehow done the impossible. "Never underestimate humanity," they said to each other. "They do not conquer through strength or fear. They conquer through something far more dangerous. They make you want to be better than you are." The end.